In my game Lexispell, I have a lot of UI, and pretty much everything is animated. I received a lot of questions about it, so I thought I could make one video where I share the tips and tricks I use to animate UI relatively easily in Godot. Note that I'm not using Godot 4.7, which comes with a bunch of new features, but if you are interested, I made a video about it, linked in the description. You might be wondering how people make juicy games where everything, every little button and texts are animated. The trick is to make pre-made and reusable tweens you can just drop on your elements. I'm going to show you how I reuse animations, how I animate the UI elements such as inside containers, and a little tricks to make that easier. In this video, I'm only using tweens as I believe it's the easiest and best method for UI. Sorry if you like the animation player. Let's start with animating buttons. One of the first things I animate in games is buttons. You use them all the time, and I feel like it's pretty important to have cool buttons. Of course, they need to match the style of your game. In my games, I would call it cartoony. By the way, if you're interested about the video where I talk about different kinds of juice and which one to use depending on your game genre, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to talk about that. So my buttons are pretty simple. I animate both the hover and unhover state by doing two things, using scale and rotation. For scale, I separate the X and Y components as I tween them to give a little bit of squash and stretch effect. This makes the scaling a bit more goofy and satisfying. On top of that, I tween the rotation in a random direction, and then I come back to 0. Two things for the rotation. Don't rotate too much, as you could trigger the mouse exiting on the button. And the second thing is separate the range of rotation from the direction. This is what this line is doing. The -1, 1 in an array dot pick random is to decide in which direction I'm rotating, and then the range is for the amplitude. If you simply do range -10 to 10, for example, you'll have a lot of rotation that are close to 0. So it's better to select the range you want in the positive and then just apply the direction or rotation you want. On these tweens, I use the transition back and ease out. This is a very punchy curve with a slight overshoot at the end, which feels great for cartoony over-the-top juice. I really recommend looking at the cheat sheet and getting used to understanding what curves to use in what situation. I personally use ease out and trans back a lot when I want a punchy, cartoony effect. I play a simple SFX when hovering, but not when leaving the button. This is to not overwhelm the player too much, as we really care about the feedback when we enter the button. With that, we have a simple, very simple, in fact, button. On my basic button, I'm not doing anything else, but you can imagine changing the texture, animating the text, and tons of other things. You can kind of go crazy with buttons. Bonus tip, one thing I'd like to do with my buttons is scale the power of the animation depending on the size. So I define a size at which the animation should be at full power, and then I simply scale it depending on the size of the button. So the longer the buttons get, the scale is going to get reduced. This is super important, especially with rotation, as otherwise a long button will introduce a lot of rotation. And the longer your button is, the more the sides are going to travel because of how angles work. So I really recommend applying this kind of scale if you're going to reuse your elements in a bunch of different places with a lot of different sizes. Speaking of buttons, one easy trick to make your UI more alive is to animate the content of containers, and for example, your button containers. Let's look at my title screen for that. I have a bunch of buttons, and I want them to animate when we arrive there. In this case, it's pretty simple. The ready function will go through the children and make them transparent. It's important to note we are making them transparent and we don't touch the visible because containers will recalculate the transform of their children if something changes visibility. Making an element not visible makes it not count for the container logic, and that's not what we want. We want to make it transparent. Then I simply do a tween on all the elements to make them move or scale. Here you do what you prefer. To make it smooth, it can be a good idea to have a little delay before you start the button animations so your scene is loaded and visible, and also if everything animates at the same time, it can look busy and not pleasing. That's why I also delay my tween between the elements of the container. And here my preferred trick, especially for snappy animation for something like buttons, is to make all the tweens parallels and use a little set delay that increases slightly so they don't animate at the same time, but there's a small overlap. This feels less robotic than having elements animate one after the other. Keep these animations snappy so people can navigate fast. There's nothing worse than a slow UI because you have to wait for animations to finish. One way to make it work well is to give focus or input as soon as the button is in the scene, even if the animation is not finished. For most of your UI, this should work well, and fast players will be able to navigate fast even if the button is not properly shown yet. To make this reusable, I simply have a script I can drop on any container, and it's automatically animated whenever the node is ready. I have a few predefined animations such as sliding in or scaling, and that's enough for the most case. The game I used to showcase my animation is Lexispell, a word game roguelike that has a cool physics twist. If you are interested in this kind of game, there's a demo on Steam, you can wishlist the game, and it's probably going to release relatively soon when I publish this video. Another little trick I like when you want to add a simple animation to something that was not designed for. Think about a simple text that is updated and doesn't have a script. You can override the set function. This is an internal function that is called when you change a property value, and here you can do a bunch of stuff. In my case, I'm simply adding a little bump tween to make the text scale and rotate as it changes value. You can also make the text count up or down if it was a number, for example. You can see the code on screen. It's relatively simple, and the Godot documentation explains how to deal with this function. You can make a little reusable script and drop it on the node you want to animate. Use an export variable to specify the name of the property you want to track, and that's it. You have an auto-animated element. An important trick to animate faster is to make tweens reusable. I showed that already with the automatic tween for containers, but I also do it in two different ways. I call them AutoTweens and TweenOnce. AutoTween is a script which has a target, and it will apply a tween automatically, or manually if I really want to. This is especially useful to retrofit animation into existing codebase. For example, let's say you have a node which you show or hide during gameplay. During prototyping, you simply change the visibility, but now you want it to be animated. Instead of changing code, you put the AutoTween as a child, set the target of the various property, and you set the trigger to visibility. Now whenever you change the visibility, the AutoTween will override that and apply a tween in order to animate the node. It's something I use a lot that makes simple animation very easy. It's still a work in progress. I could make it way more complex with various effects or different triggers like other tweens or properties. Still, the automatic tweening on visibility is incredibly useful. The other simpler tween is TweenOnce. Again, it's a simple tween effect that I often use, this time triggered manually. It's useful to make objects react once, for example when you use them or when their value changes. If you update them as you work on your game, you could end up with a bunch of predefined effects that allow you to animate most things very fast. A big advantage of doing that is that it makes your game feel more coherent, the same way you use the same color throughout your game. Here you reuse the same effects. It creates coherence and it helps defining a language for your game. As you can see, animating UI is not that hard. The general rule I follow is to animate anything that changes. If something appears, disappears, or changes value, it needs to be animated. The amount of animation or how exaggerated you want depends on the mood of your game. You want to keep your animation snappy, not to get in the way of players. When animating, you layer different things and you don't make things move all at once to avoid a blocky feel. I hope you found this interesting. I have more tips and tricks for UI coming if you're interested, so please let me know in the comments. And if you're really struggling with that, or you want to work with me, I have consulting sessions, and I do freelance for Juice and UI, so don't hesitate to hit me up, link in the description. These videos are made possible by my supporters on Patreon. I want to thank them for supporting my work, and if you want, you can join my Patreon too. It really helps. Check out the link in the description. If you want to support me further, you can check out my other games on Steam. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!